Turkey's unions are to launch a two-day strike after the crackdown on anti-government protests in the capital city, Ankara. Demonstrators have clashed with police firing tear gas and water cannon on a fourth day of unrest. Rawya Rageh joins us now from Ankara. A lot of tension and violence on the streets of the capital yesterday. Did we see similar scenes there today as well?
I'm not sure I can hear you clearly, but essentially what we're seeing in Ankara today is the continuation of protests on the streets and the heavy-handedness of police responding with tear gas and water cannon here in Ankara. You get the sense as the world's attention is focused on Taksim Square in Istanbul, and we saw how the police withdrew from the scene there. It's a different scene here in Ankara, with the police still very much on the streets and present. Perhaps this, after all, is the seat of the government, and it's a very important battle for the government, not just symbolically but also territorially, to make sure that they don't want anyone encroaching on important government buildings such as the parliament and key ministries and the offices of the ruling AK party.
And as you say, it is quite important for the government to make sure that they are able to contain this, both in Ankara and Istanbul. The government and the Prime Minister have launched a fierce attack against some of the protesters, those they call extremists, and also accusing the main opposition party of being behind all of these protests. What kind of reaction have his comments elicited?
A lot of disappointment, definitely, among protesters. A 15-year-old girl here told us that, or described his comments as ridiculous, and said that he should remain silent because, after all, no one is listening to him anymore. That's according to her. But we have seen other very important political developments here in the capital, Ankara. The President, Abdullah Gül, issued a very interesting statement, essentially countering those remarks by the Prime Minister and saying that democracy is not all about the ballot box, that the message of the protesters had been received, and essentially signaling that there should have been lessons learned from the revolts we had seen in the Arab world over the past 2 years, saying the consequences of these protests were quite costly in other countries. He also made a very conciliatory move by holding a meeting with the leader of the largest opposition party here. After that meeting, the head of that party said that he relayed his concerns to the president, renewed demands that the police apologize, described the Prime Minister's remarks as provocative rather than calming, and essentially reminded the protesters of the importance of keeping their protests calm and peaceful rather than vandalizing public property. It has to be said, though, that for many protesters here, those opposition parties are largely irrelevant because, after all, they view these protests as generally organic and spontaneous, of different groups, not necessarily organized by the opposition.